Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the 10th in a 25-ish part series, journeying a couple of chapters at a time through Holly by Stephen King. This is I gotta stop wearing the black hoodies on this. I look like Jack Dorsey. Missouri boy, by the way, from the St. Louis side, of course. Not a Kansas City guy, but Missouri. So I guess we'll claim him. Lots of money there. Anyway, this is the 10th in about a 25-part series as we journey a couple chapters at a time through Holly. You'll notice, again, not notes on the screen here. Not because I have the flu. I got over the stomach flu. And if I knew that on the other side of the stomach flu there would be more Holly waiting for me, I might have kept it around a couple more days, to be quite honest. But here we are. This video will have 3 sections. Kind of. Basically, this video will have 1 section and a half. There is a So What Happened, there is a Lit Crit, and there is a Writer's Notes, Writer's Corner, Writer's Circle type portion of this show. There will be no Writer's Corner portion of this show, but I'll explain why when we get to what would be the Writer's Corner portion of the show. The So What Happened portion of this episode is about a half dose, and we have some actual things to talk about in the Lit Crit. So, what happened? Barbara hangs out with her idol. Hooray! Cut to Holly as she tracks down Bonnie's ex-boyfriend's last address. Then she takes his old roomie out for coffee and gets, I say his number, but not his old roomie's number. Some pronoun confusion there. Gets Bonnie's ex-boyfriend's phone number and calls him. Gets a voice message. Then she spends some time looking at the footage from when Bonnie was abducted. She notices a van. Really, guys, it seems like that's what it's going to come down to. She noticed a van. Stephen King has sold more books than God. Stephen King has written, got to be 70 books. Got to be 50 books. Easily 50 books. Easily 50 books. Probably over 50 books. Got to be 70 books. Stephen King has spent most of his entire career in this sort of genre. I mean, serial killers are sort of horror adjacent, right? They are certainly real world horror. He spends a lot of his time in paranormal, almost paranormal realm, things like that, questionably paranormal realm. I'm sure that their Bag of Bones, I believe, is about a serial killer. I'm having trouble placing other. He wrote a book about the one that was in prison, Shawshank Redemption. So that's with criminals, and The Green Mile again in a prison. So there's criminals there. There is a serial murderer. I don't know if you would call that character a serial killer in that, because he did not seem to have as much of the serial to him. But all that experience in this sort of realm, and Stephen King seems to be heading towards catching a serial killer because they drive a van. Anyway, she gets a call back. So she notices the van, has funny feelings about the van, and messages a couple other people about the van. And then she gets a call back from Bonnie's ex, and she's mean to him. Boom. That's a couple chapters, baby. I mean, I defy you. Tell me what else happened. I'm open to knowing. I'm open to hearing. Tell me what else there was to be commented on. Now, let's get to the Lit Crit portion of this. On page 182, And here's the reason I talk about this here. Hypothetically, this could be talked about in the writer's corner portion of this, because I think that there is some verisimilitude, not verisimilitude, there is some heft here, but the heft which is here is not practiced here. So I think it's worth talking about in the lit crit portion. We have, and this is the chapter where Barbara is meeting her idol, the poet. Her idol challenges her. Tell me why you write poetry. Why do you even want to? Barbara replies. Barbara looks down at her hands, then back up at the old poet sitting across from her. The old poet whose face is little more than a skin-covered skull, who has forgotten or ignored the Oreo crumbles littering the bodice of her dress, who is wearing blocky old lady shoes and pink support hose, but whose eyes are bright and completely here. Barbara thinks they are fierce eyes, raging almost. Because I don't understand the world. I hardly even see the world. It makes me crazy sometimes, and I'm not kidding. More or less, that is the correct answer for why someone should write fiction, write poetry, write novels, write short stories, etc. We don't get that from Stephen King in this novel. We get a whole lot of judgment from Stephen King in the past few novels that he's written, and that is not. I mean, you used to get judgment calls from characters in Stephen King books, but a lot of that, it was easy to read as the characters themselves. We're going to get to another bit which should be that way in this next chapter, but it's not. But even if, so here's the thing. Stephen King's characters right now do not have complexity. They're good guys or they're bad guys, and all the good guys think exactly like Stephen King. And hey, maybe that's my fault for knowing something about the author. Maybe I should be more careful not to know about the author. But I think that the way that these judgments roil underneath the surface of the text as it is, would lead you to know the judgments of the author. When I returned to Stephen King for Fairy Tale, I was completely taken aback at how much of Stephen King's personal views had found their way into that novel. And again, I mean, whether I agree with them or not, you can feel, even if you agree with a viewpoint, feeling the judgment, not assessment, not lesson, the judgment behind it does not make anyone feel good who recognizes it. And they are judgment calls that Stephen King is so quick to pull the trigger on which Stephen King is so quick to pull the trigger. It's not a yes, no, 1, 2 type of answer. It is a where do you stand on XYZ issue, because I'm going to go ahead and tell you where I stand. There is a probably apocryphal story about Robert Frost. Robert Frost. If you don't know Robert Frost is one of these guys who is sort of the the old angry curmudgeon of poetry. That's kind of how you have to read Robert Frost. Robert Frost is the image that people paint now of Clint Eastwood. I just try to keep a little bit of distance from him. He's brilliant, and he'll be able to make good movies. And if you're in his movies, just do what he says and don't question him. But You want to be part of that. That's Robert Frost poetry. Robert Frost was brilliant. Robert Frost was absolutely good at poetry. Probably you didn't want to know him, at least from my experiences with his poetry. There's a story about Robert Frost, probably apocryphal, that he was going to take on a student, and he had a choice. Two guys. So he asked them, "Why do you write poetry?" And one of them said, "Because I have very important things to say, and poetry is the way that I need to say them." And the other guy said, "I like to have fun with words." And that's the guy Robert Frost picked. Despite the fact that Robert Frost wrote crusty old man poetry, he picked the guy that wanted to have fun with words. Why? Because that's the way you learn. That's the way you write, is as a learner. There is a quote from Ernest Hemingway, something along the lines of, "It is the duty of a writer. A writer seeks not to explain, but to understand." Something like that. It's not the direct quote, but it's something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, everything just comes out as propaganda. Art is where the reader decides for his or herself. Propaganda is when the writer is trying to tell the reader what they should think. It's just the way it is. Now I have to ask, if you're here, if you're 12 minutes into this video, I'm assuming you have read this. Maybe you've even read the entire book. I'm taking this just 2 chapters at a time. Probably that's too slow for you. What is the purpose of this chapter in this book? I will be very surprised. I will be very surprised if we get one. I will be meaningfully surprised. I will be pleasantly surprised, but I will be surprised nonetheless. This chapter does nothing for us so far in this book. Look, I'm all for character moments. I'm all for having special things for your characters. I'm all for whatever the sort of transcendence is that you want to have for a character. I'm not against things like superhero movies. So if I'm not against things like superhero movies, why would I be so opposed to a story where a young poet meets her idol? I'm not. But why do you want to put that smack dab in the middle of a novel about a serial killer? I'll be very surprised if there's a reason. So 194, we get back into Holly's chapter. And Holly has gone and picked up, I think he's a college age man. They're a little bit after college though, aren't they? Because I thought Bonnie was old for college. Maybe I'm wrong. Either way, so you're talking about 20, 21, 22-year-old man that she has picked up, stranger that she has picked up. We get this quote on 194, "Having a strange man, big, bearded, and hungover, in her car might have put Holly's nerves on edge under other circumstance, but this young man, Randy Holston by name, strikes her as about as dangerous as Pee Wee Herman." But 13-year-old boys in the park required backup? Either Holly is inconsistent, Stephen King is not paying attention to his own novel, or both the character and the author may be brain dead. You want to pick up a 21-year-old man, big and bearded and hungover? But even to approach 13-year-old boys in the park, you had to have backup? Really? Okay, whatever you want, Stephen. And then this is probably the biggest slight. So remember that talk we had earlier about how, look, I'm not I was all on board for American Psycho. Patrick Bateman in that novel tells you some things that are probably not things you want to take seriously. He has his own viewpoints in that. I never expressed that those viewpoints were the viewpoints of Bret Easton Ellis. All sorts of violent stuff going on in Fight Club. I never said, hey, Chuck Palahniuk should be arrested. Not everything that a character is expressing in a novel is what the author believes or intends or endorses. But listen here. Holly's driving around as she gets the return call from Tom, which is Bonnie's ex-boyfriend. She answers and says, "Wait one, let me park." Holly pulls into a vacant space. She never talks on her phone while she's driving unless she has absolutely no choice and thinks people who behave otherwise are idiots. And it's not just against the law. It's dangerous. This is the guy that wrote Pet Sematary. This is the guy who wrote that scene in the sewers in it. If you've read the book, you know the one. If you haven't, don't Google it. This is the guy who wrote the Dark Tower series that has violence every 3 to 4 sentences. This is the guy who wrote The Shining, which has a scene where a father attempts to murder his wife and son with an axe. Holly never talks on her phone while she's driving, unless she has absolutely no choice, and thinks people who behave otherwise are idiots. It's not just against the law. It's dangerous. No, Stephen, no. Don't put that in your book. Don't put someone driving and talking on their cell phone in your book. It's too much. We have to edit that out, Stevie. This is the guy who wrote Pet Sematary. This is the guy who wrote Misery. Now is afraid to write a scene where someone is driving around talking on their cell phone. Okay. Moralize about it, Stephen. Go ahead. So we're going to return to this idea. And this is the last point here before the writer's corner, which, surprise, but we're halfway through a novel about detective work. We're halfway through a novel about detective work where the protagonist has accidentally observed a van in the only known abduction footage from the night that someone was likely abducted, and gets a funny feeling about the van. No, things like this, they are the moment they know that someone has been abducted, they're looking in a 50-mile radius. How many vans are there? The fact that so many people just happen to have gone missing around this radius in this little town, no one has been doing this math thus far. We could believe it in it because part of the story, the plot of it was that the entire town was sort of enchanted by an interdimensional spider clown. It makes sense. But here, all of these people just happen to have gone missing in not a terribly strung out time period. It's less than a decade, I believe, from the beginning, maybe around a decade. Was it 2008 there in the beginning? Was the first chapter 2012? Was the first college professor who got abducted? And we're sitting here in 2021, 9 years. That guy was abducted. The Hawley character was abducted. Peter Steinman was abducted. All these people going missing. They have talked about the janitor who went missing. They're talked about some other character came up in, I believe, in one of these past few chapters who just kind of went missing around the town. No one's been doing this math thus far. Okay. Don't poop where you eat. It just happens to be a van that is going to get these people caught. And look, Stephen King has been working. Stephen King knows Thomas Harris of Silence of the Lambs fame. You don't think Thomas Harris, you could have rung him up and said, "Hey, give me something here, bud. Off the old thinker there. Out of the old gray matter, Tommy. Give me some." He would have. And it's just, okay, whatever. And finally, it may seem ironic upon considering that in a series where I've gone out of my way to try to pluck something out of, at least something out of all of these chapters, to have a writer's corner thing for, a writer's corner section of these videos for. I try to do that because I think it adds a little bit of value if you have made the effort to come to this video. I'm going to do my effort to put in all of the work. It may therefore seem ironic that in a section with an entire chapter, which is basically nothing more than a writer's corner in itself, as Barbara visits her favorite poet and gets to talk to her about the craft. I mean, that's basically a writer's corner in and of itself. It may seem ironic. It may. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what I do here on the channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more videos. Literature is the only thing I do here. There's poetry every Monday. Barbara is not invited.